Alrighty. I guess we'll get started as people are still coming in. Thank you for coming, and again, apologies to everyone who got misdirected there. Small error on our part, but thank you again for sticking around and coming to the updated Zoom link. So I guess I'll start the slideshow. And I'll begin our session today with our acknowledgement of country. So I'm personally calling from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that the land that we call home and we work on is unceded and is forever will be the lands of the Gadigal people. Alrighty then. So we'll start off by, I guess, introducing the team and our three wonderful tutors here, myself, Amlin, and Mark. So I'll come back to that in a moment. So here's our three tutors. My name is Pravind. I will be your section 1 tutor for this session today. We also got the wonderful Amlin and Mark. Do you guys want to say hi a bit?
Hi guys. So that's a typo because I was too lazy when checking it. I'm not in MD1, I'm in MD2, but just didn't check that. But I'll be taking this to section 2 today. I'm looking forward to working with you guys.
Yeah, likewise, guys. Nice to meet you. We'll run through some stuff a little bit later on, and I'm looking up for section 3 this year.
No worries. Thank you, Mark, and we'll see you guys later. Alrighty, so before I begin, I'll just give you a bit of a spiel about a very quick, like 2-minute sort of summary of what HALAT is. So HALAT is actually a health NGO, a non-governmental organization. A lot of our operations, besides our GAMSAT operations, which we do in Australia, actually run in the Philippines, in the southern island called Mindanao, out of the capital city of that region, Davao City. And all the money, I guess, all the money that comes from our GAMSAT program goes there to help run sort of health programs, public health programs, and more recently, sort of mental health initiatives within the schools and sort of places where young people are working in Mindanao. So this is maybe a bit old now, but since 2020, we've had over 2,500 students, and from all the programs and fundraising we've done in Australia, we've managed to sort of send over $20,000 to help run those initiatives in the Philippines. So I guess this is a more recent update, and sort of coming back to that point about the mental health areas that we've been working with in the Philippines. In 2022, the sort of Philippines side of HALAT to Help opened their health safe space, providing sort of free mental health support and a safe space for young people in Mindanao to come in and relax and discuss mental health in Davao City. So we'll get started. So class timing's maybe a bit different to this, but we'll be aiming for about 30 to 40 minutes per section. Sorry, this is again wrong. I'm doing section 1. Max is another tutor. And then I'll be switching over to Amlin, and then Mark will be finishing up the session, and that'll take us to about 7 o'clock. Cool. So section 1. So this is a bit of a sort of a rundown, very sort of concise for anyone who hasn't sat section 1, or a very concise sort of overview of what section 1 is and what we try to do here at HALAT, should you join us for our sort of longer sessions and that start next week. So I guess I'm pretty sure everyone here is pretty familiar with what section 1 is. It's the reading comprehension part of the GAMSAT. What we do at HALAT is try to sort of equip you with the skills and techniques to sort of approach the different in the GAMSAT section 1. So surprisingly, what we know from our information is that essentially, yes, every GAMSAT is very unique and very different to each other, but you often get the same type of text or the same types of questions coming through year on, year out. I'm sure anyone who's here sitting or has sat one or more GAMSATs before would know that, yeah, there's always like a poetry question, or there's always some form of cartoon or visual image included as well. So that's what we try to do. We try to sort of go through week by week, focusing on different types of text and giving you the skills and techniques to approach that different type of text individually. Broadly, class activities include practice questions, text analysis, test taking strategies. I like to do a lot of practice questions. I find that helps a lot. And then there's also homework activities that are outside this outside lesson times to help you consolidate your learning. We have a large focus on reflective practice, so not just going through questions, but also equipping you with the skills and the techniques to be able to sort of go through, do a bunch of practice questions, and then actually sit back and have a think about how you've actually done, Sorry, Mustafa, so your question, yes, I think you should be able to access the recording. That will be sent out to everyone afterwards. Finally, it's because you have an individual tutor for each section. There will also be a lot of personalized feedback in our embedded classes. We tend to keep our class sizes quite small. I think less than about, ideally less than 20-ish people. So that means, as from a tutor's point of view, we get to know you guys very well, and we can see you guys develop over the 6 weeks and give you a lot of feedback as well. I think that last point's maybe a bit more important for section 2, where you get a lot of personalized feedback with your essay writing as well. Cool. So our plan for today is essentially talk a bit about the theory of section 1, and then practice with 2 sets of text, the theory that you've been taught, and as well so practice section 1 type of questions. Cool. So today's focus, and like I said, like I mentioned, we in the actual sort of longer 6-week sessions we do at Harvard, we go through sort of the different types of text. One of the weeks we do, I believe week 3, is philosophy, and we're going to be doing a bit of a focus on philosophical style text today. So I guess why is this important is that philosophy comes up all the time in medicine, and I was talking to a bunch of you beforehand. All of you guys are doing biomedical science. I'm sure you have encountered some form of bioethics or philosophy as well in your coursework. It's all about answering the big questions about existence, death, the mind, ethics, morals. Bioethics is a subsection of that. These topics relate to you and how you interact with your future patients. I mean, also how you interact with the general healthcare system as well. I think, now being my 3rd year, half the battle with healthcare is not only just with your patient, but also working within a healthcare system that tends to be, for lack of a better word, quite rigid and quite structured. So you need to be able to be comfortable discussing these topics and listening to other people's opinions. And that's what ASO is essentially trying to sort of distill down when developing these philosophical texts for section 1. One of the big things I just want to get across when doing philosophy for section 1 is that you actually really don't need to know too much about the philosophical topics themselves. Everything you need to know is encapsulated in the text. This goes for any type of section 1 text. What the skills that are required for philosophy, but other types of section 1 text is, interpretive skills, the ability to be able to pull out information and then apply it to a question. You don't really need any background knowledge about the different types of philosophy. Anything that you need to answer the question should already be explained in the text itself. Cool. So like I said, we've got 2 texts today. Like I said, we have one which is more of a broader text, and that's where we'll give you the opportunity to actually sort of read the text and sort of answer some questions to it. And then the second one is much more GAMSAT style, where you'll have a time limit and have some questions to answer as well. So when thinking about text and what you want to be doing, one of the things we really work on at Harvard is this idea of active reading. And I guess a subpoint of that is the one touch rule, essentially. So what we try to get you to do at Harvard is essentially get you to the level where you can look at a text, read it, sort of mentally or on your scrap piece of paper or whiteboard, annotate it, and thus you only have to read the text once. You shouldn't have to be going back and forth to be getting information for different types of questions. Why is that? Because that is often a very inefficient way of doing it, and half the battle with GAMSAT is also a battle against the clock. Doing that also, we try to sort of get you to the skill level where you can stay engaged with text, often with longer text, very much philosophical text as well. A lot of students we find get sort of disengaged or get distracted. So we want to sort of build up that sort of reading skill set so you can get through a long text and still be able to pull out the relevant information. Other things about reading the text, you want to sort of note down any tricky words. Now, again, what I sort of give to my students is general advice is that tricky words don't make a text. Very, very, very tricky words or words that you do not know, make make up a question or even asked on by the GAMSAT. The best way to sort of approach them is just try to go around them. Usually the sort of context around the word sort of gives away what that word means or should mean, essentially. This one's an important one for philosophical texts is don't get stuck in the flowers. Again, you would be dealing with very hard concepts, a lot of them that we probably don't encounter on a day-to-day basis. Philosophy tends to be very theory, very sort of scientific kind of writing, like very sort of high detached ideals. You'll be encountering those kind of texts over and over again. You don't want to get, if you don't know what exactly is happening on the page, you don't want to get stuck down too much in the details. Just try to draw out the main ideas. And for the most part, that is what will get you through a philosophical text, the big ideas that that are being talked about in text, rather than what any individual philosopher or which individual philosophical school said what, which is often what all of these texts are talking about. So with analyzing the text, spend some time analyzing it. There's no hard or fast rule about the timing of how you want to do it. What I usually give to my students when I'm teaching is I sort of a 1 minute per mark kind of situation. So if you have a text, philosophical text, then it'll be the longer one. So you tend to have 5 marks, 5 questions. You want to be at minimum spending about 5 answering those questions. Now, if you actually work that out over the sort of GAMSAT length, that works out to, I think that works out to have about 20-ish minutes of spare time to distribute around. That is your reading time, and that's your analysis time that you can divvy up between the 10 units in section 1. Yeah. And you want to sort of, one of the things we do get at Howard is we sort of work, as we're working through the different problems with philosophy, no less, we give you a framework of questions you want to be asking yourself and sort of filling in as you're working through different types of text. So this is as I mentioned, this is the framework that we think works best for philosophical text. So the first question you should be asking about any philosophical text that you encounter is, what are the key messages, right? What are the key messages being pulled out from the text? As a sub point to that, what is the main messages of the text overall, once you've read the whole thing? Importantly, it's like, what does it say about being human, or what does it mean to be a human in this scenario? Again, like I said, philosophical texts tend to be quite detached. You really want to be sort of looking at trying to sort of apply it to your own day-to-day life. A third point is that if you're really stuck, can you express this philosophical idea in your own words? Finally, again, can you imagine this text being written about you? Like, what does it look like in your life? Or if we were to apply this philosophical idea on a worldwide basis, what would it kind of look like? So if you work down that framework, you should be able to get most of the information that you need to answer any possible questions that ASA can throw at you, because they tend to sort of go for the main ideas rather than nitty-gritty details of philosophical texts. Cool. So we'll jump straight into it. So here's our first text. So what I want you guys to do is I'll give you guys 5 minutes, have a read about it, and try to answer those questions on the previous page. Like, what are the main ideas? What are the key messages? Can you actually express some of the philosophical ideas in your own words? And have a think about different opinions that might be presented if the text was expanded as well. All right, sounds good to everyone. I will give you guys 5 minutes starting now. Alrighty then. So that is 5 minutes. So we'll just have a quick discussion about this text. So hopefully all of you guys managed to get away with the sort of main ideas and the purpose of text. Maybe part C is a bit harder to sort of pull out. But in terms of its main key ideas, I hope you guys got out the main sort of idea was that broadly this text is asking about essentially how do we define the idea of the authentic self. And then we essentially get a lot of quotes from a lot of different philosophers, probably too many to take note of. A lot of different philosophers trying to sort of argue how the authentic self is sort of related to this idea of narcissism. So overall text takes a very negative view of like the modern idea of the authentic self. Okay, I'll probably move on to the next slide. Yeah, so authentic self. Here we just have sort of a summarization of some of the key ideas from different authors. So Leish, one of the earlier sort of philosophers, compares narcissism with authenticity. Bloom compares it with self-centeredness. Bell, who was probably more on the economic side, sort of connects it with economic viability of our current capitalist society. And Feldman is talking more about the corrupting influence of the external social, or essentially the people around someone else who's trying to present their authentic self. And I guess overall the purpose of this text was to sort of discuss and sort of consolidate all these different opinions on the idea of authenticity. Now, note that we didn't ask you to sort of pick out certain passages or any or pick up on certain like sort of quotes or anything, right? We were really asking you, because this is what the strength of this text is, to pull out the main central ideas. Now, it's possible that ASA may ask you to sort of like look at certain individuals and what their ideals are, or answer questions on certain individuals. Nothing about their background, but just whatever they said in the paper. This is where having that scrap piece of paper or whiteboard just to note down a name and like whatever they said is a good idea with this type of text, because it's quite name heavy. Yeah. Any questions about this text that we've just done, or any comments about it? No. Okay. I guess I don't have too much to say on this. It was really just a practice to show. Hopefully, you guys can pull out the main idea and then look at some of these sub ideas as well. So I guess we'll move on to our final one, which is a proper GAMSAT text with questions associated with it. So, so this one will give you 10 minutes to do. Now, there are questions on the other side page. I'll just, give me a moment, I'll just stop sharing. I've taken a screenshot of the questions so you guys can have it while looking at the text. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see those questions. And here's the text, and I'll give you guys 10 minutes to have a read and start answering the questions, and we'll have a discussion about the questions at the end. Alrighty, so that's time. I hope you guys all found the text all right. So I'll just flip over and show you guys the answers now. So here are the answers to the 5 questions I provided to you. I'll just go through them quickly and I'll give an explanation for each of them. Like I said, at the start of the slideshow, there was my email. If anyone has any questions, feel free to email me about it. So why is question 22D? Because it's asking about what the main purpose of the text is. Now, it was hopefully very clear from the sort of way the text was structured and how it talked about different philosophical ideas. The idea was essentially it was giving an explanation of all the different types of happiness and well-being, or the ideas of happiness and well-being there are. Usually what I like to do with questions is try to eliminate as many answers as possible and find evidence to prove certain answers more correct than others. So, you know, A doesn't really make too much sense. B would make sense if the whole thing was about hedonism, but it isn't. And C actually is not again correct, because it's talking. C is not correct in a lot of senses, because it is talking in certain areas about the psychological conditions of people affecting how happy they are, especially with sort of the life theory and the hybrid theory at the end. 23 is B, because this is asking a statement of which sort of ideas can be put together. So D is correct because essentially the life satisfaction theory and the life satisfaction theory and the sort of emotional state theory both put the person and how they experience the world as center to how they experience happiness. So that's sort of the big one there. With 24, the explanation is that the emotional state view is unlike hedonism in the sense that it does not view happiness in the context of pleasant experiences and feelings. Rather, happiness is associated with how one feels and manages their emotions and contributing factors towards one's overall sense of emotional well-being. So that's with the emotional state view. Whereas you can sort of see with things like, I guess one of the questions we often get here is why B is also not correct. B technically is correct in a sense, but it's not totally correct, because hedonism isn't about pleasure, but it's actually more about pleasure seeking, the act of finding that pleasure, not necessarily about the pleasure itself. And remember, these are talking about broad ideas about how to live one's life. So hedonism sort of posits that one should sort of maximize their happiness in life by going out and seeking as much pleasure as possible. Now, will all those actions get pleasure? Not necessarily, but our act as sort of people should be to try and sort out as much pleasure as possible. So there's a slight subtle difference there based on the explanation given in the text. 25 is then asking you to sort of put yourself in the shoe of what a hedonist would say. So 25 is, happiness should be our greatest priority in life. That is wrong because that is more towards the sort of the life theory presented in the text. Again, remember, hedonists are pleasure seeking. They believe that the goal should be to find as much pleasure in sort of physical and sort of, you know, grounded activities. A happy attitude is integral to well-being. Again, that's more with the emotional state. C, enjoyable experiences are linked to happiness, which, given the definition of hedonism we got in the text, is probably the most correct answer here. And D, life satisfaction and pleasurable experience are equally important. Obviously, that is equating two different ideas as being equally important to individuals' happiness. That fits more with the hybrid theory. Finally, 26 is asking about essentially what the author, the person who wrote this text, believes about the hybrid theories. Now, if you actually read the text, see, there's actually a lot of emotive language in this text. What the author is really doing is being very neutral and just giving us information and letting us to make up our own judgment on these different ideals. So saying something like it's positive and negative doesn't really make sense there due to the lack of emotive language, specifically in that section. Is it specific and relevant? We don't actually get that from the hybrid theory per se, because again, it's talking about these broad ideas. And remember that the hybrid theory is essentially trying to bring together all these desperate ideas of happiness. So it's not very specific and relevant. If this was about one of the more individual theories, then yeah, specific and relevant, but not really in this case, 'cause it's sort of a mangling of different ideas. And it's asking about if it's pacifist and useless, which we don't get any of that language or any sort of inkling that is the sort of how the author thinks the hybrid theory is. So over then here, the correct answer is all-encompassing and personalized, which makes sense because again, in the text, we know that the author talks about how the hybrid theory is about all these different ideas coming together. So it's dealing with all these different facets of happiness that are discussed in the previous theory. But also then the author then discusses in the later part of that section how it can be personalized to individuals' tastes and personal opinions as well. Alrighty then. Any questions about that text or about anything from this whole section 1? No? Alrighty then. Then I'll hand over to Alan to take over section 2.
Okay. Prav, can you allow me to share screen?
I'll give you, what do you call it? Hosting rights. Can you make sure you pass that to Mark at the end as well?
Yep.
Because if you don't, it will cause the room to collapse.
Yeah, we'll do so. Okay, can everyone see my PowerPoint? Cool. Okay, guys, so for those of you who missed it at the beginning, so my name is Omlan. I'm currently an MD2 based in Sydney, and I am the Section 2 Halal tutor. This is probably my fifth season of doing the GAMSAT. So I really do enjoy Section 2, and I'll kind of tell you guys why I do before we kind of get started with this lesson. I think this is not me saying because I am a section tutor, but genuinely, this is the section that you can probably see the fastest improvement over the shortest period of time. And it is really that one section that, in my opinion, anyone can improve. And like just with a little bit of like, guidance and signposting and structure, you can really see big improvements. And this is something that I have gotten feedback from all my previous seasons as well. So firstly, just to talk about, I want to just talk a bit general about like some of the common mistakes of a section 2 essay, because we obviously only have half an hour together, and then we can kind of, if you guys have at any point have any questions, please feel free to let me know, and then I'll try to answer them. One of the advice that gets thrown around quite a lot about section 2 is reading widely. I'm sure you guys would have seen that, like, oh, read this particular book, read this particular passage to develop your ideas. For me personally, I think that's a very inefficient way of doing it. I didn't do it. I'm sure you guys are all busy with undergrad work and other life commitments in general. So what I always say about section 2 is like, you cannot write something thoughtful in the GAMSAT if you haven't thought about it before. So I like to think of section 2 as very much like a preparation for the med interview, because even there, you are trying to write something that's a bit more unique and more personalized to yourself to stand out, just like in a section 2 essay. And how I tend to really do the 6 weeks lessons, we usually spend only one lesson on theory. So I do believe in action over theory. So maximum of one lesson where I kind of go through there's around 5 different structures that I like to use for a section 2 writing. So we kind of go through those ones in one lesson, and then we slowly build up on starting with introduction. And that seems, introduction is like, oh, who cares? It's just probably 2 sentences, but really just in the introduction, how can you actually define the scope of our essay? For example, let's say one of the problems that we'll be discussing today, and I'll kind of explain it more when you get to that slide, is like, let's say we are doing a essay on art, right? That's such a broad topic. So in the introduction, how can we narrow the scope or the thesis of our essay? Whether that be like, am I talking about a particular type of art? Am I talking about the effect of art in a particular population, potentially, for example, Indigenous Australians? Or am I talking about art in terms of its economic benefits? What is it? So like defining the thesis, because most people tend to write very broadly in a section 2 essay, and they tend to introduce a lot of points because they think like, oh, if I just write a lot more, that increases my word count, which is good. But honestly, the more points you introduce, you actually make it harder for yourself, because then you have to unpack them. And if you don't unpack them, you're just going to end up with the essay that's very descriptive as opposed to analytical, and end up losing more marks. And And so what I usually like to say is that, okay, just a quick question to the floor. What is the hardest part about section 2? And we're all feeling very shy, but anyone brave enough? No? Okay, I can see Hassania. Sorry, I'm not picking on you. If you don't have anything to say, that's fine. Do you have anything to say? Like, have you said it before?
No, to be honest, I haven't, so I don't know much about it. But I guess just in general with essay writing, sometimes the idea that it's so subjective and, whoever's marking it, I guess, like there's always going to be different perspectives and how they view it could be different to like another marker, that kind of thing, I guess.
Right. That's a really good point. And Megan said, I think the flow was really hard. What do you mean by that? Do you mean flow as in like within that very short period of time? Because obviously you only have like 32.5 minutes to write. And I said, did you find that like you were unable to like have enough points that kind of flow together? Is that what you mean, Megan?
Yeah, I thought that the topics were like, it was pretty broad, so definitely narrowing the scope would help. But I think linking those ideas together was really hard for me.
Great. And because that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. So I think the first thing to realize, thank you both for participating. I really appreciate it. So is that there are so many topics, literally anything that you can think of can come up on the section 2 essay, right? Like anything from food, democracy, to anything to like beauty or art, or anything you can think of can be a GAMSAT topic. And people oftentimes ask, is it based on luck? What if on the day of the GAMSAT, I see a topic that I know about, so I'm going to do well. Or if I see a topic that I'm not good with, I'm going to do poorly. And I would rather you not rely on your luck because, personally I have very bad luck. So I never things never go as I want them to go. So it's not like a safe way to approach it. So what I like to say is that, is it possible for us to know every single thing about every single topic? Of course not. So what the most important thing that we developed through our 6-week is for each of my students to come up with at least 2 particular lens, which is what I call the lens approach. What that means is coming up with at least 2 topics that you're either passionate about or know a lot about, whether it be through your personal and professional experiences, that you can kind of embed it within any of the topics that come up. And I'll kind of show you in one of the example prompts that I have picked for today, how that works. And that would hopefully help with, what Megan has said about like narrowing down the thesis, but also making the essay flow. So think of this. Let's say we're writing an essay on art. One paragraph, I'm talking about for some reason, I don't know, something like, oh, we need to appreciate art and how there's such a focus on from the government to study STEM topics. And but we need to still know that art is still a very valid option. It's a good thing. Okay, let's say I talked about that in one paragraph. And then the second paragraph, for some reason, I'm talking about how music is a great way to express yourself, creative expression, self-expression, self-love. Do you see how disjointed that's going to feel? And most people do that. And that's why a lot of people end up writing like 3 body paragraphs and none of their points kind of flow together, because they are talking about, they feel like essentially to the marker, they are essentially discussing things that are completely they're loosely linked by the common theme of art, but they themselves don't flow onto each other. Okay, so that's something to be aware of. And in terms of what Hassania has said about the subjectivity of it, they do have obviously clear marking sheets, but it is marked by human beings, right? So for Halad, we do have a marking service as well, free, shameless plug, but through that we have multiple markers, and then that will each mark and cross-reference your essays. And sometimes there might be disagreement as to, I might have given your essay 14 out of 20, someone else may have given 16, but even in the real GAMSAT, they do get, checked by a few people to kind of ensure that subjectivity doesn't have a massive effect. But again, no one can promise that. Okay, so that's something we talked about. Any other challenges that anyone had? For those of you who have said it before or are kind of struggling with the whole practice thing, you can post in the chat as well if you don't want to speak. No? Awkward silence it is. Okay. That's okay. I'll move on. So like just talking about the whole lens approach. So what the lens approach essentially entails is finding at least one topic that you feel that you somewhat know about. So for me, one of the topic that I did a lot of research on, both as interview prep, and I think it's just a high yield topic in general, and a very important topic, not just a high yield topic, but a topic that's very important, especially if you're trying to build a career in healthcare, was about Indigenous Australians, so about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. I'm not an Indigenous person myself, but I think it is such an important topic. And what I gained from that was that, for any essay topics that would come up, I would try to focus my essay through the perspective or the lens of how does it affect Indigenous communities, okay? So that could be, if the essay is on something like about education, then I could try to see that link with that topic. Or for example, let's say we're writing an essay on art. My undergrad was in science, so I've always done science, and I'm obviously now in med, so I don't have an art background, so it's not a topic that I can meaningfully add much to the conversation. So instead of just writing a generic essay about how art is important, art is good, I focused my whole essay on the cultural appropriation of Indigenous art by non-Indigenous artists. Do you see already how that's a much more refined scope? Like you have a much more clearer way of dissecting the prompt, and by narrowing that focus, you can kind of talk in a bit more critical way, if that makes sense. Okay. Something else that we talk a lot about is that that we try to do over the 6 weeks of section 2. I think Prav mentioned it earlier, is that the classes are pretty small, and that's done intentionally. So we usually have around 20 students, and what happens is that you get to, with section 2 is a bit different from the other sections in the sense, it's not just about learning from me. The more ideas you get exposed to, just for example, every week in our 6 week, we'll try to go through around 2 essays. So over the end of the 6 weeks, you should have been exposed to anywhere from 10 to 15 essays or 10 to 15 topics. And then a lot of the times you start being able to use the same idea from one essay into another essay, and that only comes with exposure. And then you also kind of get to learn from other people. It's not about plagiarizing someone else's idea, because at the end of the day, all of these ideas, are, it's not like it's going to turn it in or anything like that. As long as you're not memorizing someone's essay and reproducing it, then it's fine. It's like taking the idea and putting your own spin into it. It's very helpful. And we do go through a lot of personalized feedback as well. Okay. I'm just having a quick look. So in terms of something else that a lot of people ask me about in this open classes is that about the timing of an essay. How do I get better at the timing? I think for those of you who are a first time sitter, at this moment, don't worry about timing, because that just adds a lot of pressure on you. So just at the moment, just focus on writing the content. And I also get asked, what's a good word count? Hard to answer. I would say aim for anywhere from 500 to 600 words. I think that's a good thing to aim for, because anything less than that, your essay, you're probably not going to be unpacking too much. And anything more than that, you're probably going to run out of time for your second essay. But again, your mileage may vary. None of this advice is you have to follow it. Personally, I did, on my first attempt of the GAMSAT, I did receive in the top 10th percentile for section 2, but that doesn't mean that, I'm by no means acer or anything like that. So in terms of breaking down, so just at the beginning, really work on your, really just work on getting your ideas together. So choosing your lens, a topic that you think has, and when you choose a topic, it has to also have enough mileage. And that's something we kind of work through on the, on this session. So I'll give you guys an example. In my last session, I had a student for the March GAMSAT. I think he had a degree in aquaculture or something like that, and he wanted one of his lens to be on safe water or something along the lines of that. So I was is that a topic? And hopefully you guys can see that's a very niche topic, and that's probably not something you'll be able to link to a lot of the different prompts that oftentimes come up on the GAMSAT. So I was like, okay, why don't we zoom out a bit? Then we kind of realized that, oh, he works in a rural area and a lot of his work is for this rural community. So I was like, okay, why not just focus on focus the whole thing from a rural perspective and trying to use that as a lens that you can kind of use for a lot of different topics. Again, this is why you have to have at least 2 lenses, because if you have one, if that doesn't work, then you're kind of in a tough position. So having 2 lenses that are not overly similar with each other, but also going to just help open up things a bit more. Okay. Now, so the first thing that we'll do is kind of like, what's the first thing that we do when we see the 5 quotes. One question that I oftentimes get asked is like, do I need to include the quotes in my essay? Please don't. No one's going to give you mark for copying and pasting something that's part of the question. You're wasting time. And secondly, I get asked, do I need to focus my prompt based on one particular quote, or use like, the overall like theme from all the quotes? What do you think? What's a better idea? Like respond to one quote or all of them? No idea. Okay. Okay, guys. So basically, I would probably say that like focusing on like, I don't think there's any right or wrong answer. If you focus on one code, just make sure that you haven't misinterpreted that code, because I've seen so many times when people have like just focused on one code and they focused on one of the concepts of a code, but that's not really the main overall theme that's presented within the prompt. So you can write an amazing essay using the most amazing an amazing essay using the most amazing like language, your lens, but if it doesn't address the end of the day, the topic, you're not going to do well. So this is when, again, when I say the lens approach, and this is why we work through it in the lessons, is that you do not just simply ignore whatever the topic is and go like, oh, you know what, I'm just going to write about whatever I want, and like I'm going to write about indigenous health or whatever, and it has no relevance to the topic. Okay, so in here, I personally don't spend a lot of time looking at the quotes, because I'm like, okay, just oftentimes it's usually the word that comes up in every single time, right? Like here, it's pretty obvious that the topic is art, because that seems to be coming up quite a lot. Some people like to focus on just one quote and just go with it. That's okay, but I'd be like, okay, the topic is on art. Then the next thing I usually do is like I try to essentially find a marriage between the topic at hand, which in this case is art, and one of my lenses, and see, okay, how do they go together? And that's your thesis. And that's what you ultimately put in introduction. So in your introduction, you should at least have a thesis sentence, which is basically going to clearly articulate that you have A, identified the topic appropriately. So in this case, it's art. And B, you have identified like a refined lens, like as in like what about art are you going to talk about throughout your body paragraph. Okay. People oftentimes also ask like, do I need to use a lot of examples? Personally, I think the more like writing a bunch of examples is not the best way to approach section 2, because none of it's showing critical thinking or analysis. Yes, you do sometimes need an example to and so that you can unpack it to support your argument, but use it as an aid, not as a crutch. That's probably how I would describe it. And I personally would usually do 2 body paragraphs. Again, this is just my opinion. And the reason for that is oftentimes when people try to do 3 body paragraph, the writing, it loses like the quality, because every 2 minutes you're having to jump from one paragraph to another one, so you're not really getting to meaningfully contribute to the discussion, because you are not getting to expand on your points, if that kind of makes sense. Okay, so now what we're going to have a go is like, how much time do you have? So like maybe in the next 5 minutes, if we kind of just have a look at this topic, and if we could all just try to, obviously we're not going to get to write an essay. If you could just maybe write an introduction, or just even if you guys don't want to do a full introduction, that's okay as well. If anyone would like to just like maybe do like a few dot points, like as in like, okay, what exactly would you want to talk about in your essay? So just like a rough skeleton of the essay, dot points, or a fully written introduction, however you feel comfortable. And then if at the end, if anyone wants to share their response anonymously, obviously, and I can probably maybe give some feedback to it as well, if you guys would prefer that as well. Any questions before we do that? No? Okay. So I'll probably start the timer now. I will see you guys in 5 minutes and we'll just kind of see how we go. Great question, Minnie. So we are just doing the prompt on the screen. So on art, basically. See you guys in 5. Guys, do we need a bit longer? That was around 5 minutes. Okay. Well, no one's saying anything, so I don't know. And if we need any longer, so we'll probably stop the timer. What was in the chat? Okay. Cool. Someone posted their response in the chat privately to me, which is good. Do you mind telling me if it's something that you are happy for me to read out loud and give feedback, or is it something that you do not want other people to have access to? If you could say that privately in the chat, then we'll go from there. Yep, I can read it out loud. Cool. Okay, so someone has posted, I guess, their overall structure. So I'll kind of read it out, and then we can kind of go through some of the feedback for it. So, so they're saying art is a critical marker of human existence, universal tool that allows for expression of one's own life to preserve teaching, cultural practices, and importance in its symbolism as a way to communicate ideas. So first paragraph is going to focus on beauty, affinity to beauty being synonymous with art. Humans desire beauty in their lives, and be able to capture the essence through art evokes a strong sense of longing. I think that's a very strong point. Second paragraph, I'll give all my feedback at the end. Second paragraph, art may act as a way to gain insight into oneself, the inner workings of the psyche in a visual avenue that is widely decipherable. In this, not only can people understand each other better, but also can attribute their own feelings to the art, becoming unique to themselves. Okay. Third paragraph, political importance of art. So as a medium to express ideology in an indirect or subliminal way. So the outreach of art in fields such as journalism, where artists can express their indignation or rebellion through their work in a way that are impactful, universally understood, but still covered that may allow for them to express their ideas safely. Okay, cool. First feedback would be really, really good communication. Remember, you get marked on two things, right? Like the content and the communication, and both are equally as important. So what does communication mean? Some people like to think that communication is like, oh, spelling, grammar, punctuation. Those things you don't directly get marked by it, but obviously if your spelling and grammar is so bad that I can't even follow it, like it's going to impede my ability to comprehend your writing, that's when you get marked down for it. And another part, but the most important part of communication is like, do you have a clear structure? Like, is your writing easy to follow? Is it, are you simply repeating yourself? Like, and this constant overlapping, like, you know, one moment you're talking about something else, then you're jumping to something else. So in this particular passage that I read out, it was easy to follow, and there was clearly some sort of structure going. Okay, so marks definitely for communication. In terms of looking at content, from their introduction, we could clearly see what they were focusing on. So they were saying art is basically expression of oneself, and they tried to focus things on like cultural practices and like, you know, way to communicate ideas. Okay, I personally would say that, you know, instead of writing all three of those body paragraphs, I think the third paragraph was the most powerful. Why? Because it's purely because sorry, I just lost my train of thoughts. Just got another message as well. Yeah, so the reason it's very good is that it actually has a clear kind of like a problem effect model. Like it's like saying like, not necessarily a problem, but like, you know, exactly pointing at, okay, we are focusing the whole thing on politics, so, and like journalism, and how art has the practical impact. And I feel like that is probably a paragraph you can unpack more. With the first paragraph, whilst it was really like well written, I'm not sure if you can like make the whole paragraph like into a full like 200 or 250 words of writing. That probably my only feedback, though for paragraph 1 and paragraph 2 goes better together, like they flow more naturally from each other. But I personally like the third paragraph better because there was, I guess, some sort of like, why should I care? So what that means is like, you know, why is it important, and how what are the effects of a particular thing, if that kind of makes sense. But overall, that was a very solid piece of writing. Now, I am running out of time, so I will pass it on to Mark now. But hopefully you guys found this session somewhat useful. Obviously, we only had 30 minutes together, so we had to move quite fast. But if at any point, if anyone has any questions or anything like that, feel free to like email me. My email, I think, is in the Halad website, and I'll just post. Wait, okay. I'm just posting the section 3 content that you guys are gonna go through in a second with Mark as well. Okay, guys. Lovely meeting you all, and good luck for the GAMSAT. Hopefully, we'll see some of you guys in my class. Mark, can you, are you able to share a screen, or do I need to pass
Yeah, I
on?
will. Give me 1 second there.
Yeah. I'll just stick around till like you're able to share a screen.
Cool. We working?
Okay, bye.
Sweet. Thanks, mate. Hey guys. Apologies for the technological issues we had tonight, but so basically what we're going to do is I'll record this video on my computer. Carline's going to work her magic, and we'll paste them together and tap this onto the end of the recording. I apologize again for people being thrown out. Obviously, ideally would have been live. Please shoot me an email if you have any questions, but I'll try and do this as best I can to make it as seamlessly as possible. So I'm Mark. I'm one of the Section 3 tutors at Hallett. And I guess a little bit different format to how we've done Section 1 and 2. I don't think sort of talking about it sort of, I guess, despite what the slide says in a philosophical sense, is as effective. I think with Section 3, I think the best way to go about it is doing questions and sort of, working through questions to sort of develop skills, find the best ways to go about it, and also using that to guide your study. That can be a little bit counterintuitive for some people, but I think that if you've tried to study for the GAMSAT by picking up a textbook and reading through it, you've probably realized at some point that's not the best way to go about it. So the way that we've tailored our program is 6 weeks, very question heavy based, a combination of me working through them, you guys showing us how we work and sort of sharing our swapping skills, me showing you guys some techniques on how I would go about it. Most of the questions have been designed by myself, but good mix of homework questions by the Hallett students. And I think hopefully through that provides a good balance of, here are the key things to study. Here is, the key ideas of questions that you'll be tested on, developing time management skills, getting used to that pressure, getting used to that working under timed exposure. And yeah, we'll work through some of those tonight. I think just quick hits. I'll just share, just in the interest of the recording, and I guess it covers a lot of the questions that I get. But so I hope this is perfect. So Section 3, the assumed level of knowledge for the event tonight was that people have sort of at least have a familiarity about the GAMSAT. But if you've never come across it, this is the GAMSAT information booklet. It's available on the ASA website. So Section 3. 75 questions, 150 minutes, so 2 minutes per question. That's the timing we work around. Some of the previous practice exams that ASA have put out had a different timing, but when we're going through our questions and sort of what we're trying to train you guys on is 2 minutes per question, and that's how we've worked around with the questions we've designed. So it's reasoning in biological and physical sciences, so 25% physics, 20% organic chemistry, 20% inorganic chemistry, 40% bio. Perfect. There we are. So chemistry 40, of which it's half organic, half inorganic, 40% bio, 20% physics. That's not to say that you need to be guns at all those subjects, but the expected level of knowledge is up to first year bio and chem of university and year 12 physics. I think more importantly than that though is maths ability and problem solving and graph interpretation, which are the fundamentals of what we go through in our program. If you guys want to know a little bit more about me, here is a bio. I will post the link to this in the YouTube, but you can also see the link up here. But essentially, it's my story of how I got in. But for those of you guys who haven't met me, basically, I'm a second year medical student at Melbourne. I came across Hallett in 2020 through a friend, and I was lucky enough to get offers for medicine from Melbourne, Sydney, and Flinders, largely on the strength of my GAMSAT, which was largely on the back of Hallett preparation. So I use them for sections 1, 2, and 3 for the intensives that you guys will be hopefully just signing up for. And I've since been tutoring them for a few years. and I speak to this from experience. I really highly recommend it. I think it's a really good way to sort of build as a foundation of your practice. I think the accountability, the time commitment, the variety of stuff that's thrown at you, working with other people, I couldn't speak highly enough about it. So when I had the opportunity to get involved, I jumped at it, and I've been tutoring for a few years now, and I really love it. Yeah, so I think that's all I wanted to go through before we get into some questions. So I'll just go through these quickly just on the slides, but the bulk of it's going through some questions. So over the course of the 6 weeks, we'll sort of be discussing some key skills that we're working on, but ultimately that'll come through in the questions that we're going through. We're working in small groups, group-led discussions, and basically, what you put into these, you get out of it. I did sections 1, 2, and 3, I think, for slightly different reasons. Section 2, as I'm sure you guys have just seen with Amlan, I think it can really change the way that you think about essays, planning essays, and I really desperately needed that for my score. Section 1, it's a bit of a strange one to prepare for there, and I thought that was to squeeze every point out I could in my GAMSAT prep. Section 3 for me was about motivation. I did all the sciences and maths in high school and university. For me, it was about, I was 6 months into my preparation. I needed something to keep me motivated. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make is that people can do the courses for different reasons, but ultimately what you get out of them is the effort you put in, doing the homework, doing the after class, the pre-class work, pardon me, and coming in, putting in a hard 2 hours, meeting me halfway, and really putting the effort in. And I think those are the people that historically we've seen do the best. So each time we'll have key text types, key skills, and how to improve them. And basically the meat and potatoes of it is going through GAMSAT style questions, having a discussion, and getting as much time practice as possible, really trying to get you to the point where you're ready to hit practice exams running, and then ultimately go into the exam day and hopefully smash it. Okay, so what we'll do now, I've got a 6 question sets, which the link to which is in the in the YouTube comments. I will scan through the slides just slowly, just so that for whatever reason, if you guys are having trouble with that, you can pause it as needed. But the best way to do it is we've attached a Google Drive, a Google Doc link. And if you could have a go at that, start a timer for 12 minutes. My questions are generally pretty time challenging. I think that's one component that I really like to include in it is maybe not so much of a priority on fundamental knowledge or sort of, they're not all extremely complex, but I think generally speaking, I try to test your ability to problem solve under time pressure. I think that's ultimately one of the big things of the GAMSAT is that they're trying to separate a bunch of really intelligent people who have really good university scores. One way of doing that is getting people under time pressure. And so that's something that I really try and test. If you can do it under 12 minutes, that's gravy. If you need a little bit more time, by all means, but don't give yourself 20, 30 minutes. And also it's about building those good habits. So if you get used to what 2 minutes per question feels like, and if you can do hard questions under those time, hopefully you'll be like me on the day where you did find that the timing was quite a bit easier, the ACE questions. Okay, and so just some of the questions that we're going to go through. So some of the skills that we'll go through over the course of the 6 weeks, dealing with contextualization, extracting variables for the STEM, So some of these will be featured in this question, but that's more of just stuff that we'll go through in more details in the intensives. But yeah, so start your 12 minutes, and then we'll go through it. Okay, so those are the questions. I'm going to switch over now to my iPad where I've worked through them. And we'll see how we went. It's just loading now. Okay, cool. So we have the exam style questions here. So basically, there's quite a bit going on in this question. And I think the first thing that hopefully sort of realize is being able to pick what's important and what's not. There's going to be a lot of information thrown into the GAMSAT, and not all of it is important. So whether that's reading through the question and sort of just making a mental note of, okay, what I think could be important, you know, direct text evidence, things like that. Whether you like to read the questions first, that's up to you. Sort of over the course of our intensives, we sort of like to empower people to find a style that works for them. Personally, for me, I like to read through the question as quickly as possible, make a note of, you know, when something has direct text evidence. I think that's usually pretty important, both section 1 and section 3. And I sort of try and keep in my mind, okay, that's roughly in the second paragraph, you know, whereabouts. And I sort of come back to it. But my idea is I want to be at the question as quickly as possible with a basic idea of what's going on beforehand, so as to not get tunnel vision, but also then to guide what I'm trying to go into first. So if we look at our first question, what would be the difference in time for 95% absorption from the alcohol from a full stomach compared to an empty stomach? So here we're dealing with the half-life of an empty stomach. I'll get my highlighter here. So we're dealing with the half-life of an empty stomach at 0.1066 hours versus a full stomach of 0.3009 hours. And that makes sense, right? If you have ever had a drink before, if you're drinking on an empty stomach, you're gonna feel the alcohol faster. There's less things for it to pass through, so it's going to take less time. And I've summarized this down here in the bottom here. I guess the first thing of fundamental knowledge here required is that you need to know what a half-life is. So the half-life of something is the time taken for half of it to be absorbed in this context. You might know it from other contexts, such as drugs, which is the time for half of a drug to be metabolized. But yeah, so that's the first thing from here. So I've just drawn this graph here briefly in the interest of space. I haven't done it in full detail, but if you don't know how a half-life time graph works or half-life graph works, this is the basic shape of it. The idea being that for each half-life, the half-lives are on the x-axis here. For each half-life, it'll get closer to 100% absorbed in the of the alcohol. Now, for 95% absorption to occur, we need between 4 and 5 half-lives, roughly 4 half-lives. The idea being is that after one half-life, you have half of it have been absorbed, then half again of that, so plus a quarter, plus an eighth, plus a 16th, and so forth. And this works out to being 8 on 16 plus 4 on 16 plus 2 on 16 plus 1 on 16 equals, what's that, 15 on 16, which is about 93%. Alternatively, you can work as percentages, so you can go 50% plus 75% plus 87.5% and so forth. But the basic idea is to get 95% absorption. It'll be between 4 and 5 half-lives. 4 half-lives of 0.1 hours or about 6 minutes works out to 24 minutes down here, which I have down the bottom. And 4 half-lives at 0.3 hours or about 18 minutes is about 72 minutes. So 72 minus 24 is roughly 50 minutes here. You know, we've taken some estimation here, but I think the key thing here is knowing that use the fact that the GAMSAT is a multiple choice exam to your advantage, right? And although I have been a little bit rough around the edges in getting to my answer, I realize that I've got 2 minutes to get to that answer, and it's quite a meaty question. So I'm using the fact that it's a multiple choice answer, and I'm pretty close to 50 minutes here. I'm pretty confident that's my answer. But I think this question is also a good example of I like to try and test some background knowledge. So, you know, although, you know, I don't think you can get by first year chemistry and biology without knowing what a half-life is, it is something that's technically covered in the course. So what I sort of like to always tell students is, if you come across these questions, you have absolutely no idea what it is, that's okay. Please don't be disheartened. Use this as an opportunity to go read up on what half-lives are and drug metabolism, or, you know, things like that. You know, don't spend an hour doing it, but spend a little bit of time and use questions to highlight your knowledge gaps. You know, you don't know what you don't know until you've done the questions, and it reveals those gaps. So, you know, that was always my philosophy with GAMSAT section 3, was, as opposed to reading textbooks, then trying to answer questions which may not correlate, what I'll try and do is go through question sets, attack my weaknesses, find out where those gaps in the knowledge are, build on that, and then, sort of when you come back to the questions, hopefully have plugged in those things. And over time, if you do that, you'll hopefully get to the GAMSAT with having very few weaknesses. So that's the way I sort of like to look at it. Can be a little bit counterintuitive for people who are used to getting 100% on exams, especially those from a biomed background who, know all the content before they go into an exam. But the GAMSAT is not that sort of exam. And if you can break that style of thinking before you come into that, the better off you'll be. Okay, question 2. Which of the following periods was the greatest change in blood alcohol concentration predicted by the respective models? So here it's simply just comparing 2 different time points. So no major tricks here. The first one, we're looking at between 12 and 24 minutes with Watson et al. In 3. So you can see my little diagram here. So we're subtracting, so we take away the small one from the larger one. So 0.0526 minus 0.0431. And I just did these in my head. But, if you need to draw it out in larger, if you need to, so I'll rub this out. If you need to do 0.0526 minus 0.0431 and do it that way, by all means. Again, testing the ability to do these things under time pressure. And I think that, for the purpose of this question, you could go, okay, that's roughly 0.01. If I'm doing this myself, not having made these questions, that's probably how I'm doing it. And hopefully you'll get an answer where there's a big enough gap that you can do that with some confidence. For B, 30 to 54 minutes with Windmark. So comparing 0.0483 to 0.429. So what's that? 0.0054. 6 to 60 minutes with Seidel et al. So you're comparing 0.0259 to 0.041, so about 0.015. And then D, 12 to 31 minutes with Ulrich, and here you've got about less than 0.01. So thankfully with that one, quite a big gap for about 50%. Is the largest by. So if you'd gone, A is about 0.1, B is about 0.005, C is about 0.15, D is about 0.101. You could do that pretty quickly. And I think that's a good example of, you could spend a lot more time with this question, but ultimately I want to give myself as much chance of getting every question right as I can. And if I do, if I've got 150 minutes and I get 50 questions right using 3 minutes per question, that's great if I've got the first 50 questions right. But I would rather give myself, I'd rather get 90% of the 75 questions right going at 2 minutes per question. Obviously, it's not exactly how things work, but I think that's the sort of basic idea is if you're wasting time or you're not getting to the answer in the most effective way possible, you could be doing yourself a massive disservice down the end. I found that with my GAMSAT was that there was some really tricky questions in sort of 60 to 65 region. And then the last 10, there were some really gettable ones. And I found by using time management, I was able to probably buy myself auto marks over other people who might have gotten stuck down earlier. Okay, question 3, which of the following statements are false regarding table 1? And here it's simply just going through each of them. Are they true? Are they false? Whenever I get a question like this, I always highlight the word false on it, just because, it can be as easy as, forgetting that's false and, you mark it as true and you've done the hard work and you get the question wrong. It's also, I think, a good example here. It's really important to have a notation system for the GAMSAT. So if something like this, I'm going to exit if it's false, I'm going to tick it if it's true. Having a system, whatever the system works for you, but having a way that when you're under severe time pressure in one of the most stressful exams in your life, having a robust system that you can use for everything that you're not going to make silly mistakes on. Because if you make 3 or 4 mistakes, that could be different between you getting into a medicine or dentistry and not. So really important to have a system that you can do under time pressure. So table 1, question 1 is false. Fact 1 is false. You can see just looking at the first comment that Windmarks goes up at 30 minutes. And it's also a bit vague. Whenever I see a statement, it's a bit vague in my head. Alarm bells are going off. 2, after 48 minutes, all of them are below, at 48 minutes here, all of them are below 0.05, which I mentioned earlier in the STEM, is the legal driving range there. C, Winmark consistently predicted the highest blood alcohols. Sorry, Watson consistently predicted. And if we look at column 2 here, at all time points, I believe it is, they have the highest model predicted. And D, Winmark consistently predicted the lowest. For some of them, it's the lowest, but there are other points where it is not the lowest. Find an example. Like at 18 minutes, at 24 minutes. So, pretty close to it, but that's the whole one. If you're rushing, you could probably get that one wrong. But because 1 and 4 are false, then 1 and 4 is the answer. So D. Okay. So moving into a bit of biochemistry here for questions 4 through 6, and I'll try and be quick just in the interest of time. Basically, with these sort of questions, I'm going to spend most of my time looking at the pathway. I think having a basic understanding of how chemical pathways work is really important. And you should be able to sort of get the key ideas of this without reading too much of the text. They're usually pretty self-explanatory. Same with figures, right? I think I would almost, I'll read the text, but I'll spend most of my attention on this pathway, getting my head around that. And, I assume the text might complement a little bit, but it's going to give me the key idea of it. And I've highlighted, just put in brackets here, some of the points that are relevant for the questions later on. So question 4 is talking about ethanol preventing is being used to prevent methanol poisoning. So here again, testing a little bit of biochemistry, but if we go through each of the answers individually, ethanol prevents methanol poisoning by breaking down formic acid into inert materials. So that is the incorrect statement. Again, this is just simply understanding the pathway. So ethanol, same family of chemicals as methanol, it's the alcohols. Formic acid undergoes metabolic acidosis. Formic acid causes metabolic acidosis, and it's broken down into carbon dioxide and water. So that's just a misunderstanding of the prompt in the pathway. Ethanol prevents the breakdown of methanol in the body, so that's true. A little bit vague, but it gets to the heart of the mechanism of why it works. The key here is the enzyme alcohol dehydrogenase, because methanol is, if you're giving methanol, alcohol dehydrogenase is going to be used up on breaking that down. And so the methanol won't be able to be metabolized into the toxic formaldehyde. Ethanol is difficult to administer due to erratic pharmacokinetic properties and the risk of patient intoxication. It's also very true, I believe. It's alluded to here in the text, but it's also just very logical, right? I think most people understand that alcohol is not good for you. And for administering alcohol would increase formaldehyde, but not formic acid concentration. So with the formaldehyde, this would not be increased because formaldehyde has the 1 carbon in it. So here we have the 1 carbon in formaldehyde. Alcohol dehydrogenase is acting at the side of the alcohol group here. So if ethanol is acted on by alcohol dehydrogenase, it's going to go into ethanaldehyde. So with the 2 carbons. So again, that's just a misunderstanding of the biochemistry. So I think here's a good example of question of 1, understanding how pathways works and okay, where's the functional group, where's being acted upon. Also, it's a good revision of your alkanes. So methanol, the prefix represents 1 carbon. And it's a little bit tricky because the methanaldehyde is called formaldehyde here, just a different name for it. But ethanol, has 2 carbons. So again, an example of a question where if you haven't touched this stuff in years or have never come across it, use this question to brush up on your alkanes. That's sort of what I meant by using questions to guide your learning. So in there, this question was asking for what's true. 2 and 3 are true. The answer is B. Okay, 5. Which best describes the action through which formeprazole prevents methanol poisoning? So whenever these best, so I guess with the GAMSAT, one important thing to remember is that it's always the most correct answer. You'll often get like an answer that's like pretty correct, and then you'll get an answer that's more correct. So you always want to go the more correct answer. Can be a little bit tricky to get your head around. You sort of get used to it over time, but I think it's a good thing to keep in mind. You know, if you read an answer that sounds pretty right for B, don't just circle it and move on, because C might be a more correct answer. So I was talking before about like things sounding a little bit vague. That's often a good sign that it's not the most correct answer. So here, if we go through each of them individually, fomepizole prevents methanol poisoning by direct breakdown of methanol into inert products. We can see that's not the case here. So I've got some drawings on it, but over the diagram here, but we can see that in this diagram, methanol is broken down into, methanol is acted upon by alcohol dehydrogenase, and that goes into formaldehyde, which goes into the formic acid, which causes damage. Fomepizole causes inhibition of this alcohol dehydrogenase. So the way that it prevents methanol poisoning is it prevents it from being metabolized. So it just stays in that form methanol. So again, having that basic understanding of what is this pathway doing. So when I get this question, I'm going to spend 30 seconds getting my head around this pathway. I'm going to buy myself a mark, 2 marks, just by knowing how the pathway works and avoid it and crossing out answers like this that are just immediately straight wrong. Okay, B. Fomepizole inhibits alcohol dehydrogenase to increase methanol concentration, to which the body develops resistance over time. Okay, so if I'm reading this question, I'm putting a dot next to it, right? Where I go, a dot for me, like I cross out, that's wrong. A dot for me means, you know, the first part of that statement is correct. I don't believe the second half of that is correct, right? That doesn't really sound, you know, logical to me, that their body's just going to develop a resistance to poison over time. That's not really how our body works. But, you know, I'm not going to cross it out as a wrong answer yet. I'm going to see if there's a more correct answer. Okay, C. Fomepizole provides competitive inhibition of methanol. Again, pretty much saying the same stuff, which prevents the formation of harmful formic acid. That to me sounds to me more logical, right? We know from the pathway here that formic acid is causing metabolic acidosis and tissue injury. So to me, C sounds like a better answer. Maybe it could have been worded a little bit better, that provides competitive inhibition of methanol. But I think that's the more correct answer, generally speaking. And D, fomepizole prevents the reduction of methanol to formaldehyde, which prevents tissue injury and metabolic acidosis. So in here, it's preventing oxidation. I think, you know, redox can get a little bit confusing, but generally, I think a good way to think about oxidation in some carbon chemistry or organic chemistry is that carboxylic acid is highly oxidized, and moving away from this, you're being reduced. So if ever you've smelt a bottle of wine and you've gone, oh, that's oxidized, it's because it smells like acid. So you're moving from the ethanol to the acid. And yeah, we'll go through this again, but I think a good example there, if you see that question, you go, oh geez, I've completely forgotten about redox, go use that guide to study. Okay, so maybe the wording could have been a little bit better, but I think in that question, I'm putting C and I'm pretty confident with that answer. Okay, question 6. I think this is probably the hardest question. So which of the following correctly ranks methanol poisoning treatments in order from greatest reduction of pH to smallest? So here, just the background knowledge: acid equals low pH. So pH equals negative log 10 of the concentration of acid, right? So as the acid goes up, pH is going to go down. So, you know, you often hear about hydrochloric acid, things like that, pH 0, 1, those sort of ballpark. Okay. So if we're talking about the greatest reduction of pH, I'm going to be careful of that. So I'm getting more acidic. And in here, so I'm mindful of formic acid and metabolic acidosis. So I'm thinking, okay, what's going to lead to reduction of that? So ethanol and fomepizole present, they are going to prevent the decrease in pH, right? Because they're preventing this movement there, right? And they're going to lead to increased levels of methanol, and they're going to decrease the acid. We're not going to get that drop in pH, right? So in terms of greatest reduction of pH, there's a small reduction of pH. Whereas a placebo means nothing's going to happen, sugar pill. It's going to lead to the increased levels of acid, which is going to drop the pH. So therefore, placebo will have the most, the greatest reduction of pH. So we can get rid of ethanol and fomepizole. And ethanol and fomepizole, there's nothing that we've been told that would tell us that one will have a greater reduction than the other. There's nothing in the stem, or there's nothing in the biochemistry there that would give us an indication that there's going to be a bigger change there. So the answer there is C, that placebo will cause the biggest reduction in pH because you're getting the formation of acid, whereas ethanol and fomepizole are going to prevent that reduction in pH. So I think that's a pretty tricky question. You know, if you're staring at the screen and just going, oh shit, like I'm not ready for this GAMSAT at all. You know, these questions are tough. I try to make them really challenging. I found hallowed questions were really challenging, and I think that really prepared me well for the GAMSAT. I think we'd be doing you guys a disservice if we just replicated ACER questions. You know, there's enough places doing that. I think providing unique and different challenges, but that ultimately prepare you to hit the ground running come exam day is what sort of our collective mindset is. And I think hopefully you sort of see the level of depth and nuance that are in these questions, where it tests your ability to handle things over time. It tests your critical thinking ability and problem solving. You know, you have to think about outside the box a little bit. It brings together the different domains. So I think that's a common theme you'll see is combining chemistry, biology, physics. There's enough variety in it that it covers a lot of different things. And hopefully you sort of come away with it, both, you know, feeling like you've used your time well, but also going, oh, here's 2 or 3 things that I really need to study on. Like that's how I tried to use my Hallowed sessions. So yeah, that's a little sneak peek of what we'll be going through. I've attached the, I'll just scroll through them quickly here, the work solutions, but it's essentially saying the same stuff that I've gone through. So I'll just scroll through each of these, and if you want to pause the video, or if you, the Google Doc will be there that you can go through, which probably is a more accessible format. So that's question 4, question 5, and question 6. So I'll switch back to our slides now. Stop mirroring. So there we go. Okay, hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Please shoot me an email if you have any questions with those. I understand they're really challenging questions. I remember when I went to my first GAMSAT style open night, I got just absolutely rocked by some questions. And so it's a very natural process to take a bit of a hit to your ego. And I think everyone goes through it at some point. Sort of the Dunning-Kruger effect, the absolute peak that everyone goes through, where, you know, maybe they have a tiny jolt of confidence and then they just get rocked, and then you build yourself back up. So that's where we are. We're right at the bottom. Maybe you're at the top, but yeah, it's a very natural feeling. And as I said, you know, I think I really credit to a lot of the success that I had with applying for medicine, getting the offers that I wanted, being able to go where I want. And now, you know, 2 years into medicine, I'm absolutely loving it. And so that's really why I want to give back and to help tutor. So yeah, please send me an email, mark@hallowed-health, if you guys have any questions on what we went through tonight. I'd love to see as many of you guys as possible for the Section 3 tutoring we have over the intensives. Really enjoyed it in the past. We're constantly revamping it, trying to make it better, and trying to tailor it to you guys. And sort of, I think over time, we're finding what works, what doesn't work as well, and we're constantly improving it. And I guess just with that, we have our emails down here at the bottom. So Max, it'd be Pravind at hallowed-health, not Max, Armand and myself. And we'll be starting our 6 weeks intensive course. We can see the link down here, and we'll post this in the chat. But they start next week, so you can see this timetable here. We have section 1s on Tuesday, pardon me, at 7 p.m. For section 2, we have Wednesday at 5 p.m. and Saturday at 10 a.m. And then myself, I'll be doing my section 3 classes Thursday night and Sunday evening. Tentatively, I think the Sunday class is to be confirmed. We'll tailor that as demand goes. But get in as soon as possible if you can, just give us time to plan and to work around numbers. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed tonight. As I said, I would really highly check out the Hallowed to Health YouTube page. There's a ton of really great resources, a lot more classes like this. I know when I was doing my preparation, I binged that thing. I'm sure you'll find some stuff with me on there. But yeah, hopefully you guys are either well into your prep by now and are enjoying it, or if this is the first step, I think it's a really great time to start. With 2 months give or take to get ready, I think this is a really good time to now start ramping up your practice. And if you guys really take it seriously, we'd really love to see you in these classes. Cool. And we have a video here for joining our next mission. And yeah, if you guys would can give us any feedback as well, we'd absolutely love that. I apologize again for booting you guys out and the technological issues we had, but we live and we learn. But anyway, so yeah, so all the relevant links will be in the chat. Hope you guys got something out of tonight. We again apologize for the inconvenience, but I look forward to seeing as many of you guys as possible in our intensives. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday night, and thank you so much for coming. Cheers.